you're probably the only reporter kind of had a clear idea of what was happening on the ground.
You have breakfast with someone or have lunch, and then the next day they're gone, injured and medevaced out or killed. And
I don't believe the average American knows how many Marines died in that area.
so the last couple of months of that deployment were very difficult, because knowing that we were going to come home with one less person.
Get this news that they're gone. And that's how ridiculous the battlefield was.
Some very scary times, some close calls.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Hamidi Jassim, author of The Terrorist Whisperer and host of The Black Side Show. In today's episode, we bring you Lieutenant Commander Amy Forsythe, who was a former Marines for 18 years working as a media correspondent, who covered some of the most brutal battles in the Anbar province like Fallujah, Vermont. If you like our show, make sure you like, subscribe, enjoy the show. It really is, right? Like back then at combat zones, you meet people, you see there's so many people on the ground, and later on in life, you realize it was just really small world. It wasn't as big as we thought it was.
That's right. And some great chance encounters. And, my career as a combat correspondent in the Marine Corps and later as a public affairs officer, that's really the best part, is getting to cover this, share the stories, share the courage it takes to wear a uniform, take these photos that will become prized possessions and treasured memories from those very difficult times when you're serving overseas. Photos can really be a lifeline, and later, and looking at the photos to jog the memory. And so that's why I just love to be able to look at the photos and share the photos with people that I've crossed paths with over the years and told their stories.
What made you join the military? What was like young Amy's like?
Well, I was actually inspired to join. I lived in San Francisco, so we had this Fleet Week event every year, and we see the Navy and the Marines walking down the street in the city. And my grandfather was a Marine officer, and my grandmother was an Army nurse, and they served in World War II and at some of the height of the Pacific Island hopping campaigns. And they met in Guam, and liberated the island from the Japanese occupation. And my grandmother tended to the wounded there. My grandfather was an amphibious tractor Marine, an amphib Marine. They call them Amtraks. And so I just grew up hearing their stories and sort of the romantic side of the victory in the Pacific. And then they came home and raised a family. And my dad just encouraged me to look at the military as an option. I wasn't a good student. I was an awful student, actually. I barely graduated high school, but that's not why I joined. I was just really drawn to service. And if it's something I could do and be a photographer and tell the stories and do community engagements, that's what I wanted to do.
I mean, those who barely graduate high schools end up making one hell of a career in the military. Something with that, right? Like as soon as you said that, that hit me hard. That was close to home, right? And it really it has something to do is like when you're in high school and you feel you really want nothing to do with this, because I have this feeling myself, and I don't know what it is. People who don't do well in education do wonderful on the field. Do you feel like this is something you were meant to do?
It really was a calling, and I've never really felt like I worked a day in my life. I would have done all this for free if they let me, but they actually paid me. So maybe I was just bored in high school, and I was just seeking adventure and travel and bigger things than high school. And so I left my small town, hometown in Sonoma County, and the Marine Corps took me around the world, really, literally. My first duty station, I was in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And right off the bat, we had this major joint task force humanitarian crisis when the Cubans and the Haitians flooded the oceans and tried to come to America. And this was in 1994. Some of your viewers might remember. And so from right off the bat, out of the gate, I was already working a real-time humanitarian crisis where we had 70,000 migrants trying to come to America that ended up on a small little tiny Navy base in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So,
Wow.
adventure, crisis, real time reporting. It was just an amazing experience. And then, after 9/11, I just kind of rode this wave and picking up these deployments, getting mobilized, and just couldn't rest easy at home knowing that we were still at war and that still our troops were
Yeah.
out there. I just could never really relax unless I was there at the tip of the spear on the in the thick of it, in the mission, on the mission.
It seems like it was a family legacy for you because your grandfather was a Marine, and I have had the honor to work with people who are third, fourth generation Marines. I know like within the Mexican culture, there are a lot of Mexicans in the Marine Corps who has been in the Marine Corps their whole life, their whole entire family. Um, Back to your life, to how it was, how you started this career. Um, where was your first deployment in the military?
Well, yeah, I joined and my family was kind of shocked. They were a little worried, not sure if I was going to make it through Marine Corps boot camp at Paris Island. But I made that easy. I played sports in high school, so I felt like sports really is a metaphor for life and can set you up for success no matter what. I played tennis and I
Yeah.
swam and I was pretty competitive. But my first duty station, I went to school at the Defense Information School. At the time, it was being held in Indianapolis, Indiana. So I braved a very, very cold winter there. And then my first duty station in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And it's only 90 miles off the coast of Florida, but back then it may as well have been a million miles away around the world because communication was hard, phones didn't work, there was no internet per se, no email. So it was the old fashioned letter writing. So I did feel a little bit disconnected from the real world, but we really got busy because of the nature of the crisis that had evolved over the
Crisis
first
does
6
happen.
months.
Yeah, and where was your first combat deployment? Was that Afghanistan or
Yeah,
Iraq?
so I served at Camp Pendleton for many years, and then right after at 2001, I got off active duty. But then 9/11 happened, and immediately I got mobilized to active duty to serve in Afghanistan. So 2002, I geared up, stepped off, and went to serve in a joint task force, a civil affairs joint task force in Afghanistan with the Army as a Marine, public affairs chief, a combat correspondent. So in the early days in Afghanistan, we were, around Kabul. This is before ISAF started, before the heavy lift, the big army came in. So it was really kind of before it
Yeah.
got dangerous, actually, but got to see a lot of the sights in
Wow.
Kabul.
In Kabul. So when I can't imagine what civil affairs job back in 2001 when the technologies weren't where it's supposed to be right now. So you probably just had your camera and you were like wandering around Kabul, Afghanistan, trying to collect info and stuff.
That's right. It really was. It was pervasive. It was easy to get around, and I was with the teams, and we actually traveled all around the country to the different sites and partnered with the State Department. At the time, they were building the provincial reconstruction team model. So literally, we would go to a site, let's say in Kunduz or Ghazni or anywhere around the country. We've set up the first 8 and go set up base camp, very rural area. They would shove out supplies in the middle of the night in an open field. We'd go and retrieve the food and kind of be self-sufficient. So making those first inroads with locals. So we were definitely some of the first Americans that Afghans were seeing popping up with these provincial reconstruction teams. So I was taking photos and video, reporting on this progress. So it was very sparse and rural, but it was a great experience. And little did I know 20 years later how things would end, but it definitely was a great learning point. And Afghanistan is such an interesting, magical place and ancient history there. So I was really just overwhelmed with how how much the people there, the poverty, but how the history of the land. It was incredible. But I had plenty of friends, a lot of media, Afghan media. We go out to dinner, we would visit with them. We had really good relations, so things weren't dangerous at all. So It was a
Yeah.
humanitarian mission that allowed us to interact with the locals.
And for those who are listening, basically, a public affairs officer is pretty much as a combat reporter, media reporter, pretty much what it is. And correct me if I'm wrong. And I've seen him in Iraq, I've seen him in Afghanistan, and it's one of the coolest jobs in the military, right? Like the skills you need to have, the level of education, the communication skills that you need to have. It's more than just a soldier fighting in the ground. It's actually a soldier that's trying to report, that's trying to connect with other human beings that might not speak the same language. How challenging was that was for you as an American reporter in the military trying to connect with the Afghans?
Well, we always wanted to try to bring or highlight the good work that we were doing by sharing the good news or working with the local Afghan media and making connections for them, setting them up with people to talk to, showing them the progress that was going on. And so I'll fast forward a couple years to Iraq when things were so dangerous that media outlets were not allowing the media to come there because of risk to injury and death. They didn't want to risk that. So it was people like me and other combat correspondents and public affairs officers who were risking everything to go out, get the footage, get the photos, and bring it back and then send it to the media so they could
Oh,
report
combat.
on it. So, really, as you know,
Oh man,
risking
okay.
everything to do media embeds and get the media
Yep.
to where they wanted to go, or collecting the footage and the photos to supply to the
Wow.
media to tell the story. So, very dangerous, but it was exhilarating. And if you love a challenge and you really want to make a difference working in public affairs or as a combat camera photographer, no 2 days are ever the same, but you really have to love being in the military because that's what you're going to showcase and highlight.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say that Afghanistan and Iraq, I know it's very two different animals when it comes to the environment, the people, the culture is a little bit different. And fast forward, you went to Iraq. What was your first deployment in Iraq? What year was that?
Well, so I had served in Afghanistan 2002, 2003 timeframe, and I came home. I finished college. 17 years after graduating high school, I finished it with a bachelor's degree. And then the war in Iraq continued on after the initial phase in 2003, 2004. So I deployed to Iraq in 2006. So then at the height of the insurgency in one of the most dangerous places there in Anbar province, where we had places like Ramadi, Fallujah, the Syrian border, where it was very dangerous. And so we didn't really know how dangerous it was going to be, but I caught this wave going in February of 2006 for a year-long deployment
Yeah,
with the Marines, the 1st Marine
yeah,
Expeditionary Force at Camp Fallujah. So that's what led me there, and really just media wanted to know. Things were getting really dangerous very fast, as you know, and
yeah,
we were out every day covering the stories. Really just surviving, day-to-day survival of trying not to get
yeah,
hit, but keeping up with the combat operations and enabling the Iraqis to tell their stories. So it was my job actually to take a
yeah,
satellite dish around to all the civic leaders, the civilian leaders in Iraq, and the military leaders for them to go on Al Jazeera, Al Hurra, Al
yeah,
Arabiya and tell their stories to encourage the local populations to cooperate with
yeah.
the locals. So that was part of my job.
So 2006, that was your first time into
That's
Iraq,
right.
pretty much. You see, like I was there. Obviously, I was there in 2003. This was my native country. In 2004, like the first Fallujah battle hits on, and the Marines that I served with in that year, I would never forget. And as you know, I was trained by Marines in Camp Taji, Iraq, and would never forget my Marine instructors and everything they have done for me. In my heart, I always feel I'm one of them because of the training they provided, the connections, the culture that we adapted. Perhaps the Marine Corps trained some of the best fighters in Iraq at the time, and 2004, during the first Fallujah battle, I will never forget that the generation of Marines that fought with, some of them been in the service for about 19 years and had about one more year to go. Some of them have not been in any hostile environment, have not been to combat their whole entire career, and then just found themselves right in Fallujah in the most brutal fighting in the world. And um, I would never forget that. Like that generation just had to be golden to what they went through.
Those were some tough days for sure. And I was back here at Camp Pendleton, seeing the reports, and really it was a time of sorrow and despair for the community here, even the support network here. Just knowing that our Camp Pendleton-based Marines, especially, were in the thick of it and risking everything. And as you know, along with the Iraqis, and putting
Yeah,
everything they had into it and sustaining those combat operations for 2004, 2005,
yeah,
and then into 2006. And so anyone who really kind of volunteered or wanted to go and be in that, they
yeah.
knew kind of what they would be getting into, because it was nonstop. No, it was gas on the pedal the whole time, the whole way through.
I gotta say, it's one of the worst province in Iraq, and I mean, there was no peace for years in this sector. Anbar province was just complete tough environment, and I think it's just because of the people that live there, the culture they have, the way they were going about things, and um, I know that they had the army there first, and somehow they pulled the army and brought the Marine Corps, and that's when the fight just took a different level. It went to a really different environment because I remember arriving for the first time in Anbar province. There was no Marines at the time, and that's when the Marines just dropped down and they pulled the army because the army was getting a lot of pressure. And that the environment in there, I've never seen. I don't know, like, I don't wanna make it, like, worse than any other battle, but fighting door to door in their own hometown was extremely difficult, and, we just really didn't know how we were gonna go with this, and, I remember it was right after they hanged the contractor off the bridge, the Blackwater contractors. That is when things went
That's
bad
right.
in a way that was just beyond it was just it went to really, like, to a shit show, and everybody in that town carried a gun and was fighting us, and, it took us years to find out what are the reasons or the motives, but, um, the Marines that fought in there, God, I mean, I give it to them. I can't imagine having 19 years in the Marine Corps, having a wonderful career, peaceful career. You've been doing great, and you find yourself deployed for a few months to the most dangerous zone in the world, and there's a big possibility you might not come home. I can't imagine that.
Yeah, everything happened so fast, and it was just very tough to figure out what's the course, what's the pathway, how do we get out of this? And Marines, they kind of live for that, they train for it, but also the Iraqis who suffered too, who fought and suffered, and it was just kind of all a blur. And if we go back and kind of
Yeah,
dissect, where did we go wrong with the Fallujah Bridge, with the four contractors, things really
yeah,
took a turn for the worse. And sort of waiting for that debrief of like the history of well, at this point it went this way, or I think it's still too soon to kind of even do some reflective soul searching on
yeah,
that. And I think the simultaneous wars going on in Iraq and Afghanistan, and for a
yeah,
lot of troops who bounced between the two, like myself included, I still, it's a little blurry. Was that in I've tried to keep it straight. Luckily, I have photos to remind me of
yeah,
which country, although very
yeah,
different, but which experiences, and kind of in the in between times of the people were injured or killed, and it was just kind of hard to separate. Especially, so I'm here in San Diego at Camp Pendleton, where a lot of people a lot of Marine sailors did constant, continuous rotations to either Iraq or Afghanistan.
Wow. And what was your feeling when you got ordered to go to Iraq in 2006? Like truly, like when you got those orders, I know as a Marine, you kind of you do what you have to do and get ready and go. But what was going on inside of you when you got ordered to go to Iraq? What went through your head first?
Well, I had been hearing all the reports and staying up, but I kind of thrive in a high up tempo environment. So I look for hard assignments. I've always thrived in that more difficult assignments. I get bored if things are just too stale and stagnant. So I was looking forward to it. Met my team to include people like Lynn Kinney, Megan McClung, and Colonel Brian Salas, and we really formed a really tight team. It was really just one of the teams of teams in terms of public affairs, and everyone was gearing up for. We didn't know. We knew it was going to be difficult. We just didn't know how difficult. And so, when you have good people, really that's all that matters. The mission will take care of itself. And as a team, if we gelled together from the initial forming stages, it was going to be a good
Yeah.
experience.
What month did you arrive in Iraq in 2006?
February 20, yeah, February 2006.
And the Marines at the time were doing a 6 months
For the
rotation, right? Six
for
month
the most
deployment.
part, certain units were doing 6 or 7. We were at the headquarters, so
Yeah.
we knew that we were doing 12 months. That was
Yeah.
the rotation.
12
Yeah,
months. I will never forget, some of the Army guys who did 12 and some who did 18. I served with someone who did 18 months,
that's right.
and I almost cried when he left because he just became part of us. I looked at you every single day for 18 months, and to me, it was not a deployment. This guy became part of the family. He became part of our culture, and really when he said, "Oh, my rotation is over. I'm done after 18 months. I have to go." And I was like, "What? You have to go? Why?" And he's like, because I have to go. I have a family." And really, I just never observed the part that, this person has been there that long. And
Yeah.
and I think the generation that did this, I give them a lot of respect because I don't know if people here will ever understand what's like being in combat, whether it's even for 1 month or 2 months, but going in there for 18 months or anything 3 months and over, that just becomes difficult. Uh, it's not just going away and doing nothing. It's really you're putting your life in the line every single day in your life in that deployment, and the chances of you coming home becomes very low. And that feeling I'll never forget it. And I think it used to leave a burden on me, like it used to leave a heavy weight on me that knowing this who they are, who their families are, seeing pictures of their kids and their Kevlars, it makes me feel like, you know what? His chance of making it is as long as this rotation ends after 6 months or a year for him to go home. For me, I'm gonna die here anyway. This is my country. This is where I am. I have nowhere to go. I am just in this fight. But I felt for them how what they were going through and at the time there was no technology, there was no cell phones at the time. There was like these little flip phones or whatever, and they have to go to the internet cafe to make a phone call. And some of them would come back with a very different face after that phone call. And I used to feel for them. I used to wish they just get it done and go. And then I didn't want to build that relationship because you get emotionally attached to these guys. They become part of your team. And then all of a sudden the new guy comes in and you're just like, well, I don't care for this guy. And then all of a sudden this guy becomes even more connected to you. And when you arrived in Umbar for the first time, um, uh, how many Iraqis proposed to you at that point?
That's a good one. That's a good one. I had a few marriage proposals over the course of the 2-year-long deployments I was on. So that's funny you say that. So that's funny. Like you mentioned, I did get to know and be friends with the Iraqis that I encountered and
Yeah.
our interpreters and the people that work with us on the base and people I would see throughout the course of my deployments.
Yeah.
And when I went there and was there in 2006, I came back in 2008 I saw the same people and, they were like old friends,
Wow.
and seeing some of those people
Yeah.
again, and so you think about the guys who've done multiple deployments, you start to wonder, should I
Yeah.
get dual citizenship here in Afghanistan or Iraq? Because they're doing so many deployments and it becomes a part of your lifestyle.
It was shocking to some Americans. It was actually very shocking to some Americans. They met me in the early battle of 2004, and they just saw like a regular Iraqi soldier, little young Hamidi, doing his thing. And they comes back in 2007, and they see I'm the command sergeant major in the MOD, and they're like, "What? You're around?" I'm like, "I'm still here." Like I haven't gone anywhere. I'm still in the fight. It's 5 years war, brother. I was like, it's going. And they were shocked to see me again. I was shocked to see them coming back as a staff sergeant or, got him promoted 2 ranks over. And they were just shocked, like, "Oh, you're still here?" I'm like, I have nowhere to go. It's where I was born. It's where what my country is." And I was like, yeah, I mean, I'm here and still going." And when you arrived in Fallujah, you're in Ramadi, correct?
Fallujah and Ramadi, both.
Fallujah and Ramadi. So when you arrived, and I want to go through, um, 2006 was a really terrible year in Anbar province in general, whether it's Fallujah or Ramadi, and the fighting was still going hard at that point. Um, what was your feeling coming out of the wire for the first time, going into the city? Like, what did you feel at that point?
Well, I can remember feeling a little nervous, although until you get into the routine, you just don't realize how dangerous it is until you're in the battle rhythm. And then, what I remember most is that the increase in the memorial services were just so great. I couldn't even attend all of the memorials. I mean, I just thought, "Well, I'm too busy, and there's so many." But, it hit hard, that's what the emotional roller coaster was. You still had a mission to do and get the job done, but meanwhile, the people that and your brothers and sisters in the Marines were getting injured and killed, on a daily basis. It just couldn't, it was just hard to keep
Yeah,
going at the full speed because you just were so emotional over what was happening with them. So, but try not
I,
to let it slow us down too much and still trying to process that of just how dangerous it was. So, um, yeah, it was really tough. But yeah, it's some very scary
I don't.
times, some close calls.
Yeah, I don't believe the average American knows how many Marines died in that area. And sometimes when I tell people, you realize over 1,200 Marines died in that little area. It's not that big.
Right.
It's pretty small, and it's a lot of Marines. That's a lot of Marines, and that was a tough area. I mean, that was a scary area in a way that the fighting was different, and the fighters in the Anbar province were much more skilled than any other fighters in the country because the majority of the Republican Guard in Saddam time, the majority of the most skilled officers in the military were happened to be from the Anbar province. Um, it was not a challenge to find an EOD specialist in the Anbar province. It was not a challenge to find, people who are highly trained, highly skilled, and not just that the Marine Corps had a lot of casualties in the Anbar province. It was the sector for the Iraqi 7th Division at the time. And believe it or not, the Iraqi 7th Division had the most casualties among the 10 divisions at the time who were fighting in Iraq. Um, and I still remember I was in the green zone and I would go to the combat hospital and they'd be flying injured soldiers, soldiers who only still alive, made it to the hospital and passed away in the hospital. And every single Iraqi soldier that I saw, every single body that I looked at, every single body bag that I opened, it happened to be a soldier of the 7th Division. And it makes you wonder, like, what is really happening in the Anbar province? And nobody in the world knew what was happening. And I do believe you're probably the only reporter kind of had a clear idea of what was happening in the ground, right?
Yeah, it was definitely the toughest dirt in Iraq at the time, and unless you were there, you just couldn't grasp just how vicious the fighting was and just how pervasive it was across the country. So, whether it was IEDs, mortars, sniper fire. You really uh, you just had to know and just try to stay alive. Just try to stay alive. And unfortunately, especially those 7th Division, those Iraqi soldiers, the Iraqi police were being targeted just for wearing a uniform. So, we had Sheikh Sitar Abu Risha, who was this up
Yeah.
and coming sheikh who was helping us to deliver men to go do the training for the Iraqi police, the border, the army, and we came to be good partners with him. And so just an amazing partnership, and that helped turn the tide in Ambar during that summer. And then they had the awakening at his house, where a couple Army colonels
Yeah.
were instrumental in delivering this promise that we were gonna work together.
Yeah.
Yeah, just an amazing story.
Petraeus met with him in person too, right?
I believe so, yes, Sheikh Sitar Abu
Yeah.
Risha. Unfortunately, he would be later killed and assassinated after coming to the
He was a legend.
States and meeting with
Yeah, he
President
was a
Bush.
legend.
Indeed.
Yeah, he was a legend. I mean, prior to him meeting the president, prior to him meeting President Bush, um, it, it took one person in the Anbar problem. That's why I think he's the equivalent of Ahmad Shah Massoud of
Yeah.
Afghanistan, the leader of the Northern
Mhm.
Alliance. That Abu Risha, all these the Anbar province is controlled it's controlled by tribal leaders, and there was about 12 or 13 tribal leaders that kind of control every single corner of the the Anbar province between Fallujah and Ramadi, and they have their own differences, but they still go under the same umbrella. And as soon Ahmed Abu Risha actually made a step to stand up to Al Qaeda. I mean, now knowing after all these years where the connections to Al Qaeda in the Anbar province, it would blow your mind, right? It will blow any Marine mind, because nobody in Iraq at the time have thought Iran would be connected to Al Qaeda. There was no one in the ground would ever believe that. That most people thought the Sunni insurgency is not connected to Iran in any way. And now, just in the last few days, we found out that Iran actually was involved in the Sunni insurgency in the Anbar province, and it was behind a lot of the developments that this enemy was able to get. And I still remember the media, the the government, the Iraqi government didn't believe it. No one wanted to believe it, but Abu Risha truly was legendary by making this step. It took one person to stand up to Al Qaeda, and then all of a sudden, that became a movement, and it got people to say no to what was happening, because Al Qaeda and the people who were fighting in the Anbar province were two different things, and it took people a long time in the Anbar province to really realize that, Al Qaeda had their own interest in Anbar province. They weren't there fighting the Americans for their own sake. They were fighting Americans for reasons, for their own interest. And it's interesting you mentioned him, and I wanted to go through basically the people you came across that were there. Some of them were legendary. Some of them were people that I know personally. Me and you have someone in common. Megan McClung, Major Megan McClung, who was the highest ranking Marine female to be killed in combat, which I met her in 2004 when she was a civilian, and then you met her later on in 2006. What was your, and I want to share that experience with you, how I met her too. When did you meet Megan, and how you were an NCO at the time, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So you mentioned Megan McClung was on our team, a beloved teammate who was killed in Iraq in Ramadi, escorting media. She was a public affairs officer. But actually, Megan and I had served back in the 90s together when she was brand new, fresh out of Naval Academy as a second lieutenant. And we were stationed together at Camp Pendleton, and we worked together in the public affairs office and had crossed paths through
Yeah.
the years. And she had, as you mentioned, left active duty and was working as a private contractor in Iraq, and then said the fight is continuing. She wanted to be a part of it in uniform, so she also was in the reserves and got
Yeah.
mobilized, and so we were part of that mobilized team together. So, just that she was a triathlete, uber fit,
Yeah.
scholar, bright red hair, runner. Everyone knew her,
Yeah.
so her legacy continues, and I think her death really has moved the needle so far to make people believe that women in the military is a real thing. So if women are willing to kid up and step off and go into harm's way, then that should be good enough to say, okay, we'll let you in. We've got the secret handshake. We're together in this. So she was
Yeah.
all in, and she
Yeah.
died doing what she believed was the right thing to do. And for all women serving, that's a
You
sign.
know, when I opened your
Yeah.
book, like as soon as I opened your book and I come across her picture, it's like it's the hardest thing for me because I see all these legend, but there is something about her, right? Like I see the legends in there and we'll go through them. But I, like meeting Megan is just, I was a 17-year-old Iraqi that didn't know much about the United States. And at the time, my Marine Corps instructor, Kevin Smalley, and I was like literally I was among what's called the PSD team, and it was like a 17 man. And I, I just got called by him once, and he said, "Hey, come over here." And I went there, and I think we were in the DFAC. We were just about to walk into the DFAC, and I was kind of like the star among the team because I spoke English. I was the youngest in the team, actually. I was only 17 years old. And he called me and he says, "Hey, come over here." And he said, "I'm going to introduce you to someone I really like." And I said, "Okay." And I was getting ready to meet who that person would be. And I was inside of the DFAC, and I was looking at the solid bar, and there was this red-headed woman in blue jeans, and I have never met a redhead in my whole entire life. And I just kept looking at her. I've never seen a redheaded person my whole life in Iraq. And I went over and he introduced me, and I wasn't sure who she was. She was just a civilian clothes person. And I sat with her that day to eat lunch. And truly, she kind of won me over what the American woman is like, right? I wish that every American woman could see what Megan is like. Um, there were so many women around. I think many women at the time would not have the courage to talk to someone who's from a different country, different culture. They'll probably think you don't speak their language. And my English was very limited at the time. I kind of went just started running a conversation with her, and I had a little notebook in my side pocket the whole time. And every word that I heard that I didn't understand, I would write it down because I didn't understand it. And I was trying to hold that conversation with her. And she saw the book and she opened it and she said, "Oh, you know what? This is what this words mean." And I would write down the rest of the explanation. And I've learned so much from that first meeting that every day when Megan goes to the DFAC, which is around 11:30 um, noon, that is the hit time. Many veterans know that is when you get mortar attack, right? I was so eager, I would risk myself to go around that time to go sit down every single day with her. So I end up forming this a friendship with her and Jim Gilson, who became a very well-known, now Navy doctor. Jeremy at the time, who was a civilian as well, and I sat every single day with my pen and paper, and every single day I picked up something from this woman, and I would never forget that I asked her the most stupidest question in the world to a redhead person. She had a freckles in her arm, in her face, and I didn't know what those meant. Like I didn't know what freckles are. I'd never seen a redhead person before, being from Iraq. And I said, "Megan, does these go away?" And she looked at me and smiled, really with a big smile, and said, "Actually, no, they don't go away." And the way she took the time to explain it to me, understanding where I was come from, I think if any other person would be insulted immediately, but her take would just have inspired me how she communicated with people. And I think it taught me something in my life, how she communicated. So this is the way I met her prior in 2004. I can't imagine what was like for you. What was it like for you when you ran to her for the first time in your life?
Well, I love hearing that story with the lunch and the notepad. It's great to I've come across people that knew Megan that I didn't know, but they want to share that story, and it means a lot to me because just we all have our own Megan stories, right? Well, she was
Yeah.
really, on fire, brand new second lieutenant, wanted to serve at Camp Pendleton, and just had this real sassy kind of personality about her. Just fit her looks fit her personality, as you know, and so it was great. She was a real motivator, practical, down to earth, and just
Yeah.
lit up a room, but just she rolled with the punches, and she let everything kind of like wash off her shoulder. And she was the firstborn of her. She has a brother, younger brother, and a mom that kind of raised her as she was a very fiercely independent. And so it's
Yeah.
no wonder that she went to the Naval Academy and then became a Marine officer. And so just kind of led her own path, and um luckily, we have her legacy to go on, and there's memorials in her name and scholarships in her name and chapters of the Women Marine Association in her name. And so, but
Yeah.
like her and with every other Marine, that fallen soldier, service member, they meant somebody to someone. And so um, it was just so unexpected, and it could have been any one of us, and that's why I've really
Yeah.
taken it to heart to continue to share her legacy, because just to remind people that while there are some heroes out there, heroes in combat that did these
Yeah.
m- valiant
Known for valor
yeah,
or
yeah,
combat
but,
actions.
there are
Yeah.
other people who were just killed and being at the
Yeah.
wrong place at the wrong time. There were 2 other people in her vehicle. One was named Captain Travis Patriquin and Specialist
Yep.
Vincent Pamonte, who were killed in an
Yeah.
IED. They were just driving and were just unlucky, wrong time, wrong place. And so, while they weren't doing anything heroic, they were doing something heroic just to be there in uniform. Took balls of steel, I want to say balls of steel,
Yeah.
and a heart the size of Texas to put themselves out there,
Yeah.
know the risk, and took it anyway.
And for me, she was the first American woman I ever had a conversation with. That I would be nervous about talking to any woman in uniform because most of them were young or they would react differently. So we just kind of look at each other in the DFAC, like all these other women coming through. And truly, I think I just admired how the American people were, right? Just through her, because she showed me a side that was nice. Like I saw it was my first time in my life at 17-year-old who has been living a very, very terrible life in Iraq, seeing someone that actually took the time, treated me as a human being, and didn't mind sitting eating lunch with me every day. I didn't feel like once, every time I showed up to sit on that table with her, that I wasn't welcome, right? I always felt like I was part of the team or part of she was a friend. And it's really that how I look into um a lot of other Iraqis who saw me doing that in the daily basis, they're like, "Oh, these are your friends, these are your buddies, you see them every day." And I think because of their level of education, uh, I think a lot of people lack how to communicate. Like sometimes when you talk to someone and you treat someone right, you can inspire them to the rest of their life. It could shape who they really can, who they can become. And when I met her, I was not the command sergeant major at the time. I was not anything important at the time. I was not this intelligent asset. I was just a young Iraqi kid who didn't know how to write a word. And her inspiration was just magical. How she approached people, how she treated a human. I actually got to meet many women over the years. Um, Other than Megan and be friends with them and talk to them. And I just realized Megan had something different. That Megan McClung was just shaped and made differently than many women. That she wasn't just a strong a human being physically, that mentally she was a good person. I almost felt like, at her age at the time, she was like pretty much in her early 30s, literally, yeah, early 30s, 30 years old or 29 or something like around that time. And I was just 17-year-old kid. I don't know how, if I looked at her as a mom or as a bigger sister or how I looked at her, but truly to this day, I'm inspired by her. And, I wear it in my hand every single day with her name in it. And sometimes the touches you leave in a human being, what could really change everything in your life. And many people that I approach in Iraq were not as nice, were not as patient with me, and she just chose something different, which made me respect women in the military, look at them different because of the situation she was in. And I would never forget the how I found out she was gone. I found out Megan was gone, um, and it's fine that Micah will come through. Um, I found out that Megan was gone a year later, um, and I will never forget. I was in the DFAC. Amy, you
I'm
still there?
here.
Oh yeah. And I never forget. I was in the DFAC, and Jeremy Reyes, who actually was a civilian at the time in Iraq in 2004, had happened to join the military and come back to Iraq in 2007. And I'm sitting in the DFAC, and I see Jeremy, who I knew since 2004, walk into the DFAC wearing an army uniform and a rank of a second lieutenant. And I really just walked and saw Jeremy, and I'm like, it made no sense to me. I was kind of confused that I was kind of confused that I met this person as a civilian. He's now back as a military officer. But I always remember from eating lunch every single day with Megan and Jeremy for the whole year. I always remember like Jeremy's attitude differently. He was this bubbly, smiling guy, really nice, talking and joking all the time. And the way he looks just completely different. And I literally went with the question, "How's Megan doing?" And he just looked at me with I would never forget the look he gave
Mm.
me. He looked at me and he said, "You don't know what happened to Megan?" I said, "No." And he looked at me and he said, "Megan was killed last year." And I just looked and I'm like, "Where? In the United States?" And he said, "No, it was in the Anbar province." And I never knew this whole entire time that Megan was in the reserve. I never knew
Mm.
she was called back to Anbar province. And I will never forget the feeling that I had. The feeling I had broke my heart in pieces because, like I sat down right away, with my food on the table, and I just looked at Jeremy and I was like, "You're going to be here for the whole year?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm back here." And he goes, "That's why I joined. I went back. I wanted to be back." And I will never forget the feelings. Like I said in that day, that DFAC, my food was right in front of me, and he just told me something just quenched my heart, right? And God, I think like, in a way that God, that I will never forget how bad that hurt me. That knowing she was just, gone. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, well, why couldn't it be me? Why couldn't it be somebody else? Why is it her? And in a particular to know, like, the things she left in this earth. And then it really from that time, things were getting really hard on me. Like I was working as an intelligent asset in the MOD. I was going against some of the most dangerous individuals in the world. And when I left that DFAC that day, when I went back to work to the MOD, I think the level of confidence I had to fight my enemies just went to about 150. And came back and I just looked at everything, and I was literally went back to the MOD. I was hurt inside. I don't know how to describe it to this day, without getting emotional. That I was clenched inside. I was just something squeezed me hard. And I went back to the MOD, and I think that day I was not scared of anyone. I had members of Al Qaeda who were about 5 feet away from me. I have members of the Iranian intelligence that was like 6 feet away from me that I was collecting on for a year, and I was afraid that it would do something to me this whole entire time I was collecting on them. And it's like that night I come back from the DFAC and I was just scared of no one. And I just had this little resentment, you can say, or motivation that I just wanted to smash these people. I just wanted to like, in my heart, I always feel like if these people knew Megan personally, they probably wouldn't have killed her. If they knew she had no harm towards anybody, that she would treat you as a human. She'll treat you the way you want to be treated. She'll treat you better than when your own countrymen will treat you. And I will never forget that day. To find out a year later that she was gone. And the first thing I did when I arrived in the United States, Jeremy took me to her grave, and I couldn't like hold my emotions when I went there because, like I couldn't imagine not seeing her in person anymore. Right? You always remember this person that gave you this touch, that touched you somehow, and things went since the day I saw her face. Things went really well in my life. I peaked. I did pretty well, and yeah, I would never like it. Just when I opened your book and I see this face, right, and I'm like, out of everything I have done in my life, everything that I have done, whatever that people known me for, people don't realize that I didn't do this alone. There were people out there that made a difference in my life, and it's like to open your book, and when you sent me the book and you mailed it to me, and I looked at it, Heroes Lives Here, right? And I was like, hearing your book, how big it was, and how nice it is, and how well it's done. The legends that are in this book are a lot heavier than what the book is, and um, I can't imagine what your experience was with her, and I know you were there with her the time she was killed. Were you at the base at the time when you got the news of her passing?
Yeah, on that day, she was at Camp Fallujah, Ramadi, and I was at Fallujah, but we had been swapping back and forth between the two camps. But I took the call to the office, and then they said, put your boss on the phone, put the colonel on, and I didn't know what sounded bad, but I wasn't sure. And then the boss, our Colonel Brian Salas, got off the phone and said, "Go get the others, go around the base and bring them everyone back here." So I said, "Roger that, sir." And everyone came to the office, and the chaplain walked in, and I wasn't sure if there was an announcement about something, even event or something, but he didn't tell us right away on the phone. But then the chaplain was in position to provide a prayer for everyone once he told us. It was just a handful of people, 8 or 9 people, our core team, to make the announcement that Megan was killed. I thought it was we had another teammate, another Marine, Sean McGinty, who was also in Ramadi at the time. I thought maybe Sean had been injured or something, because he was like with an infantry unit out at some houses and doing some patrols. It never even occurred, and which is sort of naive to think that Megan, of all people, would have been subject to, being killed. But sure enough, that was the case. And it just seems so surreal when he said that Megan, along with Travis and Vincent, were killed. I just thought that can't be right. There has to be a mistake. That cannot be the case. So, um, you know,
You go from working every single day with these individuals, you see them every single morning,
yes. And
and it just sounds so surreal. Like you get this news that they're gone, and that's how ridiculous the battlefield
yes.
was.
Yes. And so that's what, you have breakfast with someone or you have lunch, and then the next day they're gone, injured and medevaced out or killed. And so it was just the nature of it was just so random. And so, there has to be a level of respect that anyone who's there is subject to this. They risk everything. And so, for Megan's case, a lot of people were shocked at that. Well, the nature of warfare in Iraq and Afghanistan was so random that hopefully it moves the needle and lets people know that regardless, man, woman, that either gender, and all people, even civilians who were killed on the battlefield, like federal employees or contractors,
Yep.
everyone is at risk. And so there has to, so it's a shift, a paradigm shift to the old Marine Corps mindset
Yeah.
legacy that well, only grunts or
Yeah.
infantry were the ones to risk
Yeah.
everything. And if you're a cook or a driver or public affairs, well, you're not putting yourself in harm's way. Well, uh, everyone is in harm's way. So let's not play that game. Let's not pretend that
Yeah.
only certain people were at risk. And so,
And I remember looking at your pictures, like you guys like you guys seem like really bond together as a team.
yeah, it
That you
was,
guys have many females on the team,
yeah.
and you guys really bond together, and it looked like you guys were just having, regardless of how bad this area was, it looked like you guys were having fun together. You guys were making a good environment for
Yeah,
yourselves.
w- the military was our family. You spend every day with people, 18 hours a day, and it's life or death, and it's your family, really. And so we did make the best of it. And Megan was killed in December, so we had gone that whole year of really some
Yeah.
really tough days and hard assignments. um, but then in December, so we left in that next February. So the last couple months of that deployment were very difficult because knowing that we were going to come home with one less person. And this was before the
Wow.
internet. I mean, we had email, but there wasn't social media. So it was really still the word hadn't necessarily
Yep.
got out, to everyone, or by the time we got home. And we had a memorial service for her in Fallujah, but,
Yeah.
she in her last days, she was in Ramadi with Sheikh Sitar, escorting, Fox News and different crews. So she was, in the height of it at the time, and, made a big difference. And so if girls out there can see that women are serving, we just want to reassure that young people, we remember those sacrifices. So because if we forget, and we forget to tell the story, and we just let it pass, and we don't want to show just how much we appreciate their service, we're at risk for,
And
yeah.
she remains the highest ranking Marine female to be killed in combat, right?
I think so. There might, yeah, no, I think so. Marine
Yeah.
officer, yes. Yeah. Which
Yeah,
is
to be killed in combat, and I know there's a little thing a little statue or some little thing outside of the Marine Corps Museum in Virginia of her.
okay. Yes, there is a
Yeah.
tribute there for her. A tree and her name is placed there with a
Yeah.
placard as well. And we had a memorial. We put a nice etched rock with her name on it at Camp Pendleton.
Yep,
We weren't
I
supposed to
saw
do
that.
that. It wasn't sanctioned, but we had to do something to memorialize her. And, we all left together from Camp Pendleton, and it has
Yeah,
special meaning for us there. And that's why my book titled Heroes Live Here is that while they're not buried
yeah,
there and they're not from there, it's
but they live
home
there.
and that'll
It's a
forever be
home.
her last place of residence.
Yeah, I'll tell you, she was this little 4, 5 feet thing that was a giant in personality,
Yes.
a giant, and I
Yeah.
and I will just never forget the first time I met her, and she was getting a salad and turned around and saw me. I was this little. I was much more smaller than her, and if you see in the picture, I was actually standing. She had her hands on my shoulders. I was actually smaller
Yeah.
than her. I was like a little kid
Yeah.
standing next to her, and
Well, you brought up
w
something interesting, is that leadership comes in
yeah,
different, forms. And that her personality of being friendly and wanting to, chat with you and just help you. And that's a form of leadership. And so women can be leaders
yeah,
too. While she's not a combat infantry leading a platoon, she was a leader,
yeah,
and that she took the time
yeah,
to talk to people and share the courage and push the envelope to get media where they needed to go and make those connection
yeah,
points. And that's what leadership is. And so leaders come in different forms, but that's just one form of leadership that was on display
yeah.
that you experienced.
I wish my English was just as good when I met her, you know? it used to take me a long way to really just try to carry that conversation. It used to be very difficult for me, right? And sometimes I would see her running in the green zone,
Yeah.
and I really would not dare run with her, right? She was fast and a good runner, and I'll see her running in the green zone. Sometimes I'll be driving out of the MOD going to somewhere in the green zone, and I'll see her running through that road going towards the embassy. And I'll tell you, being a woman, um, I used to meet men who would be too scared to go take a run during that time because mortars and katyushas are falling, and the running was so sacred for her. She'll be running from Camp Honor all the way down to the embassy, and that's when I see her, and I've never seen anybody runs with her. So, like, Jim Gilson, any of these guys who are friends with her would not be there during that time in the evening. It would be just Megan flying through that road, with the way she ran, and then when I found out more about her, right, how athletic she was, I'm like, when you meet her, you just don't think this person is that much of a badass, right? But it just very humble, and most legends I've ever came across in the war happen to be just normal, humble people or down to earth people. Not definitely not mean people. Definitely not people who mistreat others. It's definitely just good humans way inside. And I know there's more legends here that I don't want to take the light from in your book. And Chance Phillip, who they made a movie about bringing Chance home. I think it was Kevin Bacon was the actor in it, right?
That's right. The film titled Taking Chance was about a Marine
Yeah.
officer chronicling his experience of bringing home a fallen Marine and the process of that. A beautiful film starring Kevin Bacon. But in the book, there's some connection points to Camp Pendleton that I didn't know. And then the research that I did, and Chance
Yeah.
Phelps was one of those who was stationed at Camp
It's a
Pendleton.
beautiful movie.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. If anyone has,
Yeah, I never knew
yeah.
the process of bringing somebody home. I only saw people get killed in combat, being from Iraq and being there in the battle with them. I've never seen the process, and it's one of the best films I ever seen. I don't know whether to call it a war movie or was just a very touching movie to see how someone was going home, and you brought this in your book, and it's a very touching story, and it happened in 2004. And what made you decide you want to put this story in your book?
Well, through my research, I started learning who was killed in Iraq and Afghanistan from Camp Pendleton. And there's a statue called No Man Left Behind statue, which is based on a photo taken by Lucian Reed with, at the time, First Sergeant Brad Castle in Fallujah. They called it the House of Hell. And as it turns out, there was a sculptor who made the sculpture. They put one on Camp Pendleton, one on Camp Lejeune. And it just so it turns out that the sculptor was a Marine veteran from Vietnam who had a son, and the son was Chance Phelps, who was killed
Oh my
in
god.
Iraq. So there's these connection points, and some other research
Wow.
that I learned is that more Marines and sailors from Camp Pendleton were injured or wounded in combat or killed in combat than any other one base or station in America. So that's kind of a heavy burden
Yeah.
to place on one community, but that's why there's just so many stories and connection points from through the years, through the 20 years, right? Some of the first Marines, boots on
Yeah.
the ground in October 2001 to August 2021, that 20-year span, it has Marines on bookends. The Marines that were killed last August at the Abbey Gate in Afghanistan
Yeah.
in Kabul were from right here at Camp Pendleton. And within
Camp
minutes
Pendleton.
of the news that who was killed,
Wow.
the community had laid flowers and memorial tributes at the front gate of the base. And so,
Wow.
just as much,
Going back
yeah.
to Going back to that photo that you're talked about, the photo that's the sculpture of the soldier, the Marines. It's probably one of the most famous photos from the Iraq War. Probably my favorite photo from the Iraq War. And What's his name, the individual that was shot? And it looked like he was of a higher rank NCO and was saved by his soldiers. And yeah, I think the way the photo looks, right? Him holding his Beretta.
That's right, many people will
And
see that there.
yep,
Yeah, to
right
give
there.
people a sense. So
It's truly one of the greatest photo of the war in the Anbar province, and I've ever seen.
yeah.
And what's his story? Who is that
Well, the
individual?
photo was taken by Lucian Reed, who was a civilian photographer embedded with the Marines there. But the person in the center, his name is, at the time, it was a First Sergeant Brad Castle. And he was stationed at Camp Pendleton. And he was wounded, but ended up making a recovery, came back to Camp Pendleton to go on to be a sergeant major of the 1st Marine
Wow,
Expeditionary Force, and a real inspirational figure in the Marine Corps. His leg was at risk for being amputated, but they were able to save his
wow,
leg, and he made a recovery, and just a real inspiration to Marines everywhere. And so he's retired now. I think he's working as an
wow,
instructor for the Marine Junior ROTC program. But once a
wow.
Marine, always a Marine. And so he
Yeah,
definitely continues to inspire. And that statue sits at the entrance to the Wounded Warrior Complex. And so after the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were fully underway, Marines were coming home injured, and there really was no place for them to go to
yeah,
do recovery or get care. And so they set up this really a model program of how to rehabilitate Marines and provide them some kind of comfort while they were doing rehab and healing from wounds, either physical or mental, spiritual wounds. Instead of putting them
yeah,
back into their platoons, they had to carve out a place for them. And so that statue, no Men Left Behind statue, sits at the entrance to the Wounded Warrior Complex on Camp Pendleton. They named it after Sergeant Rafael Peralta, who was awarded the Navy Cross for valor. And Rafael
wow.
Peralta was living in San Diego. He joined the Marines and is known as the story goes, jumped on a grenade. Ultimately, he died, but many people believe that he should have been given and awarded the Medal of Honor for his valiant efforts to save.
And I believe he
Yeah,
should. I believe that's deserving. That this Marine deserved to have the Medal of Honor, and I think that citation needed to be read. It's someone who sacrificed his life to save others, and if that's the case, I don't know why the Marine Corps have not advocated to do that. But going back to the picture and talking about this sergeant major, that in that famous picture, um, I can't imagine the soldiers that are served under him, knowing that this is their command sergeant major, who he is, and the story behind him and everything. I can't imagine the ROTC kids that he works with, how much they inspire him. And so it's a photo. It's a simple photo that truly showed exactly what the Anbar province was like in that
it
photo.
definitely became an iconic photo, and he's sort of larger than life, Brad Castle, but he's very humble and gone on to be kind of a quiet figure and retired, but making a difference and making an impact in his community. We're connected on social media, so I get to follow and see his inspiration to the next generation. The
Wow.
next generation of those.
I might have to ask you to bring him back in the
Yeah.
podcast.
I'm sure he would
Yeah,
love
because
to.
that will be an interesting person
Yeah.
to bring back. And going down the line of one of the most important, like, I don't know how to say it. It's probably one of the most interesting personnel in your book. This legend, there's something about him that is different. There's stories out there about this person. It was Major Douglas Zimbiak, right?
That's
And this person happened to be just the way he looked. The first time I saw a picture of this Marine officer, just from the way he looked, you knew this guy was sharp, was just that guy was scary. And what a legend.
yeah. Yeah, Doug Zembiak, they titled him the Lion of Fallujah for his efforts. But through my research too, he had been stationed at Camp Pendleton multiple times, and really just a larger than life figure. And so those ties to Camp Pendleton, there's this common theme. And so there's a connection when you're stationed somewhere and you leave from that place and you never come home. And so there's tributes to these brave heroes. But the connection point too, back to Megan, is that he and Megan both went to the Naval Academy, and then they both lay and rest at Arlington National Cemetery, just yards from each other. So within a span
Wow.
of a few months, maybe 6 or 7 months apart, they were killed. But now they lay in honor in Arlington together as well. So it's just this
What a
breed. They
legends
come from the same place, and that they'll forever have that connection together.
being buried in the same place in Arlington
That's right.
Cemetery. I mean, I know he was not killed with the Marines. He have done quite really well in his Marine deployments as an officer. Uh, a legacy that absolutely cannot be described. I knew he was killed on a CIA mission in Sadr City in Baghdad. Somehow the CIA has recruited him to do some things, and clearly how good his skill sets were. That he was killed in Baghdad in a very close distance a firearm exchange.
Yeah, some of these these outstanding athletes, skilled operators, that just shows you just how dangerous it was. So, these people who you'd think, well, they wouldn't be subject to danger, or they would be able to escape danger or get because
Yeah,
of their fitness or their intelligence or their experience.
yeah,
There was just no rhyme or reason, and that's what's just so heartbreaking, is that it could
yeah.
have been any one of us, but they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so that's what's so um sorrowful about the combat operations, is that everyone was at risk, and everyone, regardless of rank or gender or job, people were at
And
risk.
and and it and I think it's just it goes to show the level of war. Iraq went through 5 years of a brutal war. Clearly, we have more casualties in Iraq than we did in Afghanistan by triple, three times more. And it just goes to show Iraq was just a very, very hard um,
Yeah.
on everyone that was fighting there, and the losses and the people we lost. The people were extremely high skilled individuals. Like Major Douglas Zimbiak was an extremely well rounded fighter that have spent crazy deployments in the Anbar province to be killed that easy,
Yeah.
and it just goes to show that the fight was much more higher level, and literally, I think people had to put their ego in a box, regardless of how good you were. You could be outnumbered. You could find yourself in a very tough situation, and I learned that in 2004 really well, being in a firefight myself that went on for an hour and a half, and knowing that yes, you don't win the wars all the time. You don't win battles all the time. You could find yourself defending yourself to the last breath. And going to the next person that I wanted to ask you about, Travis Minion, who was killed in 2007 in Anbar province as well, and seems to be very young man. Um,
Yeah, Travis Manion, as the story goes, is that he wrote home and said, I'm here. I want to serve. If not me, then who? Who is going to fight this war? Who among us in America is going to fill the ranks and fill the shoes of those who have gone before? And so, in his legacy and in his memory, his family has taken up that mantra with the Travis Manion Foundation. If not me, then who? As a call to action and a call to inspire patriotism, as a call to service. And so, what I love about that is that it really has had some grassroots efforts, but he definitely came from Camp Pendleton as well, and so that story of service and the aspect of hope to inspire the next generation. Well, who's going to fill these shoes? And right now, America's having a hard time recruiting and filling those shoes of those who have gone before us. And so we want to just make that a call to action and understanding that we need all good, talented Americans to fill that void of the next generation. And so he leaves such a large and inspiring legacy.
And I think because the quality of individuals in that generation, that truly being someone who's from a foreign country that fought side by side the United States military in all branches, um, the quality, the generation, it mattered. I think that they were good people. They were not people sitting behind social media making judgments about war. They were not. They were just good Marines, good Army guys going out there doing their job.
Yeah.
Um, and it hurts me sometimes to see people would attack our cause because they don't understand the war in Iraq. They don't know the dynamics of that war. Who was the bad person? Who was the good person? There were mistakes. However, um, I feel that people who are educating about what the U.S. military was doing in the ground is absolutely wrong. That there were bad things that happened. It did not represent the Marine Corps, did not represent any military member in uniform because they were not doing that. There were so many good things people were doing. There were Marines who were out there building schools. There were Army guys who were out there building hospitals, hubbing the locals. There are civil affairs combat reporters like yourself out there getting the Iraqis to tell their story that they'd never been told, or they were never been able for 35 years to express their opinion or how they felt about things. And I wish that people take the time to understand that we were not politicians. We were just soldiers doing their job, completing their missions every single day.
Yeah, and luckily we still have an all volunteer force, and people will volunteer to do that if they have good leadership. And sometimes we're not sure why we get into a war, but we're here now. So, Martin Luther King says we didn't all come. We all came from different places on this ship, but we're on the same path, and we need to row together. So, oftentimes we found ourselves come from all walks of life in the military, but we have to work together. And if we can keep an all volunteer force, we need all good men and women to consider service as their duty and an obligation. And like you, me, we risked everything for our countries, or for peace. Really, is sort of this ubiquitous concept of like, just keep the peace, minimize the killing, and let's just try to put an end to this. And so going forward, I feel like every day we're on the edge of war with somebody
Yeah,
at some point, and that can make people very nervous. And parents and teachers and educators don't want our next generation to go into the military to be war fighters. They're discouraging that. But hopefully we can kind of meet in the middle and say somebody's got to do it. Who's going to do it?
true,
And so when we can tell inspiring stories of courage and selfless
true.
service, then we can inspire the next generation and help them see that there is pride in service. There is some self satisfaction to know I did my part, even if it was for 4 years. I did my part. How about you do your part? And so
Yeah.
that's hopefully what resonates with people.
And I hope that the new generation do take a note that whatever you're told about the war, people in the military is wrong. You usually have to get that from people who are there firsthand, people who experience it. Every time that I make a post about American hero or something, someone will come out of nowhere will say, "Oh, you are killing innocent millions of innocent people," and I'm like, first of all, we did not lose millions of Iraqis. Um, that's just false. I know exactly how many people we lost, and I know how we lost them. So it hurts me to see people make a judgment about what the American soldier mission in Iraq while they never put on a uniform, while they never served. They just come in and they put this negative comment saying, you were there for the oil or you were there for this and that. And they had no idea that the American soldier presence in Iraq or Afghanistan was changing lives. And we don't care what your politics is. We don't care what sides you go on. We don't care what your opinion is. The truth is I served side by side the American soldier every single day for years of my life. And I realized at the end of the day, the American soldier is just another human being. It's just another human being. It's going to be full of mistakes, full of kindness, full of everything. And that there was no difference. And truly, the American soldier has a special effect. And I say this, the American soldier have a special positive effect in countries. Iraq went from having a generation that doubted itself, that didn't support one another, that spied on one another, to having a wonderful generation of Iraqis today that's standing up for freedom, that are fighting for their freedom, that are believing what they are fighting for, standing up to the Iranian influence in Iraq. And if it wasn't for the American soldier having that conversation with these kids would never have been a different quality than their parents today. And people don't want to believe it. People don't want to credit the American soldier. Don't want to say, "Oh, this is not because of the American soldier." People start saying, "Oh, because it was better in Saddam time." And I will tell people, how do you know it was better in Saddam time? You're not Iraqi. I am. I lived under Saddam. Saddam was not a better time. Saddam was a horrible time. Except we just couldn't express to the world how horrible our times was under Saddam. But somehow, how bad the war was in Iraq, we were able to express ourselves. We were able to meet reporters like you and tell our stories. And so we went through. So I hope people don't look at the military the way they look at their politics, because truly it has nothing to do with us. How do you feel today as someone who's still in the military with the new generation of military people coming in right under you? We had this conversation in prior podcast, and I refuse to judge any generation because every generation has its time. And I refuse to judge young soldiers nowadays by the wrong way, because I also knew the generation of Marines I fought with in Anbar province happened to be people that were also judged. They also said, "Oh, well, you never been in combat," and then they found themselves in the first Fallujah battle. How would you feel about the younger military personnel that are joining the military today?
Well, I think like all generations, they're proud Americans, and I think that our military is in good hands. I mean, we have motivated people who want to serve. That will always remain the same. The faces and the names change, but the spirit, especially the Marine Corps, the esprit de corps and the Semper Fi spirit is still as strong as ever. And I see it every day because I live close to the base, so I do see it. I do think there are some changes happening in our culture. So those kids are growing up very, very post 9/11. They're sort of not sure exactly what that was about. And so they've lost that feeling of understanding what that is. But as you know, there are bad people out there plotting right now to do harm. And so we have to be very vigilant. And I think if we can just reiterate how urgent the need is and how
Yeah,
imperative it is to have a well-trained force, and our leaders know that. I think some culture changes, at least in America, that I've seen
yeah,
from kids. I call them kids. They're like 18, 19, 20.
yeah, yeah,
They, much more colorblind as far as race is concerned, and very inclusive of all kinds, and want their diversity and want individual expression. So, like hairstyles and makeup and nail polish
yeah.
for men and women, and just some things that, like, culturally, are different than
New.
our, age group. So,
Yeah,
aside from that, though, so long as the fighting spirit and the spirit of patriotism
yeah.
is there, if they're willing to
Still
kid
there.
up and step off and support the Constitution, then that's fine by me. As long as when the rubber meets the road and rounds
Yeah,
start coming down range, that they
yeah.
engage and know what's going on.
And you never know what generation could be in the fight because you can never get too comfortable. All the Marines I fought with back in Iraq thought they would never see combat, thought that they will just get out, get their 20 years done. And yeah, I saw a couple things here and there, and that will be it. And then found themselves in the last few years of their service to be the most brutal fight ever. And as I said again, it's just that I refuse to judge the newer generation. I recently went to um, my Marine Corps instructor retirement in Paris Island, who was retiring as a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps. So I met him when he was a gunnery sergeant and then ended up becoming a warrant officer and then became an officer and then retiring as a lieutenant colonel. And I get to attend because he was with Kevin Smalling, who trained the 17 men team that he trained in Iraq. And then when I went to Paris Island for the first time, I was talking to young Marines who were just 18, 17 years old. And the one thing that I noticed that all these young Marines nowadays are highly had such an advantage technology wise that they were such a like a problem solvers. I think they would be much more faster problem solvers when it comes to technology than our generation. And I was amazed, right? And I was like, here we judge them, but they're just not living in our time. Why do we want them to look like what we look like? And in our time, we didn't have any of these technologies. They are the Marines of their time. And that's how I looked at them.
Yeah, just a little bit of a different take on things. But I think if we continue with that Marine Corps spirit and the training is still the same. So once they kind of go through that transformation, the Marine Corps will instill in them the same core values as any Marine who goes through. But for the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, even, um, the training continues. It's kind of a struggle to maintain and retain all the great people, but I think the compensation and awareness to some issues, especially for women, I think it is improving. It always is, and there's great people and great leaders out there who are making progress. I mean, February marks 30 years for me in uniform and active in
Wow.
reserve. So 30 years, we've seen so much change. And so I'm
Wow.
very hopeful, in the next 30 years, there's going to be tremendous change because,
Yeah.
yeah. So our country, though, we know that just in this year with Ukraine and Taiwan and North Korea, you know,
Yeah.
making sure that
You never know.
we stay on our toes and that we
Yep. You never know where
prioritize.
you can end up.
Yeah, yeah, I can't let up the training, and it starts with the recruiting, making Marines, but
Yep.
attracting top talent. We don't just, we don't want just anybody. We don't just want mouth breathers. We need dedicated top people who are willing to sacrifice and serve, but also willing to make that ultimate sacrifice. And just when you put on the uniform, after that, you cross that threshold, you cross that line, that
Yeah.
you've already relinquished yourself to your fate. It's not like, well,
Yeah.
I'm not really sure if I'm willing to go all the way here. No, once you put on a uniform, you already know that you're willing to make those sacrifices because you're going to go in harm's way. And if
Yeah.
you're not okay with that, then don't go down that road. So anyone who wears a
Don't go that road.
uniform, and I've served in multiple international and worked with many different countries and many different militaries. And the one common theme that we all have in common is that we all know the risks, whether it's Sri
Yeah.
Lanka or in Poland. I worked with many Polish troops and Iraqis and
Yeah.
Afghanis. And there's a common theme that we all know. Anyone who wears a uniform of their country knows what's at risk.
And it's I always said this, being at war for a long period of time, that if you sacrifice, you have to go all the way. You can't stop in the middle. And sacrifice is just once you put in that uniform, you gotta be ready to put your life in the line for the next person. Because once you put in that uniform, it's not about yourself anymore. It's about the guy right next to you, or the woman that's in your left side, or the guy that's in your right side. So I hope that the new generation understand that we are not expecting them to be like our generation. We're not expecting them to do the same thing or behave the same way. Every generation has its time, but you have to keep the quality. You got to fill the shoes that you're wearing, and you got to keep that quality, because if that's what held the most brutal fight in the Anbar province, then that quality is working. and then that culture is working, and then that training is working, and we just need you to keep it.
Yeah, and luckily it's everything remains the same. So we are continuing to recruit top people, train them the right way, and be ready for anything. So I'm
And
confident.
I gotta tell you, your book that I had the honor to get one of the first copies here. That it's not just a book; it's very heavy in legacy. It's actually a very fun book to read. Like I actually enjoyed it because the pictures that when reporters write books, it's just beautifully done, right? I can consider myself like a reporter because I was one of the only Iraqis that had a little camera and I documented every single thing, and it's the best thing I ever done in my life. Best decision I ever made is to invest in a $200 camera. $200 was a lot of money, 2004, and take as many pictures as possible. And this is what I enjoyed about your book is that the pictures, the individuals involved, and who these people are, they were just fighting um, few miles away from me, who they really are. And I feel this is actually a perfect book, not just to adults, but also to kids to know some of these legends that served in the Marine Corps and Camp Pendleton, the legacy carries behind it. God, I mean, there is a lot of power, American power, behind those gates in Camp Pendleton. Where would people be able to find your book and find you in
Well,
person?
thank you for those kind words. I love what you've done with your book and the movie, and you've really been a master storyteller. And with your podcast, it really is inspired me to kind of share those stories and those legacies to draw out what was that just 20 years? What was all this? So there's a lot of a lot more to be told for those heroes out there, just knowing that those Gold Star families, we haven't forgot about them. And, we just want to have
Yeah,
that feeling of closure or take comfort in that. And there's a lot of pictures in that book because I know a lot of Marines don't like to read a lot of text. So it's pictures, but they can find
yep,
it on my website, heroeslivehere.com. And that's where people can order. And I would love to sign the copy and send it to them. I think that means a lot more to people. Of course, it's on Amazon and Barnes and
yeah,
Noble, but the purchase goes straight to the printer and then it goes straight to the consumer. So I never get a chance to sign it. So the connection point, I always feel like with books and first time for me, so I've learned a lot, but that being able to sign it and have that connection with the person who bought
yeah.
it means a lot to me. And I think it makes
And I would say to them, this lieutenant commander may look young, but she had spent 30 years in the military. And that's a pretty long time, basically since I was 7 years old. And, what a legacy and what a career that you had, like, that's amazing. You have to have a pride and everything you've done and what you've been part of, because how many people today that can walk by your side have never seen or done the things that you have done in your life. So it takes a special person to really do such a things and what you're meant to be. I'm a huge believer that people who really didn't do well in the last year in high school end up being the best people in their careers, end up being a millionaires or went to the military and build a legacy and build a career. And that's the one thing in common that I found with you today. And for those who are listening, this is a book for you to read. Heroes Lives Here, the tribute to Camp Pendleton Marines that lived since 2000 since 9/11. And this is amazing book. I loved it. I know my co-host Micah loved it as soon as you looked at it. And this has been a great podcast. And we went through some of the bios of some of the greatest Americans that ever lived. And what a golden generation. Um, Thank you so much for giving us your time and giving us the opportunity to be here with us in our podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to connect and follow you and your story for all these years and, continue the conversation about what people have been doing and what are the threats out there and the tremendous service and sacrifice of our military and the things we do and the places we go. It's an it's an unusual career, but I love sharing that story with people. So I appreciate the time, and it's just great to connect with you and cheer you on along the way in your journey of being such a great storyteller and a connector. You're out there, you're connecting people, and I love it. So thank you so much.
And I love doing this. I love connecting veterans to one another because I do feel veterans nowadays needs to be connected to one another. It's highly important that for vets to know that you're not alone, that we're there with you, that no matter what difficulties you're going through, we are there. We are going through it as well. And the same way we fought, the same way we breached doors, we have to hold one another through this because coming home is extremely difficult. And there's this saying that is absolutely true that only those who died can see the end of war. And when we with this, when we take off this uniform, when we come home, that is when the real war starts with us. And I advise all veterans to be connected. I actually connect with every single veteran in my TikTok, where I have a lot of following, and every single veteran that connects, I connect with them because if you look at it, we were only miles away from one another in this, only miles in between us and other soldiers who were serving in the ground and supported one another the way we did back in combat. Why can't we do the same here at home? And with having all the technologies and everything, and just be there for one another, that we don't have to know one another. We may have never met each other in combat, but let's just be there for one another. When someone needs something, let's provide that support. And I hope that's the case. And I am always here for any vet, whether they served in combat or not, whether they were in Iraq or not, whether they were in Iraq or Afghanistan. I'm always here for them to support them and hear their stories through them. So I can't thank you again for being here with us. For those who are listening, make sure you go to Heroes Lives Here, the tribute to Camp Pendleton, Marines since 9/11, and make sure you order this book.